Good evening. My name is Karen Mazza, and I am the co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area. Welcome to this debate for the primary election on September 9 to serve as a Democratic candidate for state representative to the 1st Barnstable District, the seat being vacated by outgoing Representative Cleon Turner. The 1st Barnstable District includes the following areas: Barnstable Precinct 1, Brewster Precincts 1 and 2, all of Dennis, and Yarmouth Precincts 1, 4, and 7. I would like to thank Representative Turner and League Voter Service Co-Chair Chris Mead for organizing this debate, and the Cape Cod Media Center for hosting the debate, and WXTK for simulcasting this debate as well. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, and voter service is a core element of our work. As one form of voter service, we offer to moderate debates so that voters have the opportunity to learn more about the candidates. We never endorse or oppose candidates. The League does enter an advocacy role on issues, and this is only done after studies are conducted on the issues and presented to our membership and consensus is reached. We do hope that showing this debate on Cape Cod Media Center's Channel 99 will encourage more people to vote in the primary election on September 9. Primary races are just as important as general elections, so please mark September 9 on your calendar and get out and vote. At this point, I would like to thank and introduce League member Joan Craig, who will moderate the debate this evening. Joan is a Cape resident who lives outside the 1st Barnstable District. Joan will explain our procedures for the debate and introduce the candidates and the members of the media who are panelists this evening.
Thank you. Welcome to the Candidates Forum for the State Rep to the 1st Barnstable District. This evening, we have the opportunity to hear from the 3 candidates running for the seat currently occupied by Cleon Turner. And before I introduce the candidates, I want to go over the format, which I have gone over earlier with not only the candidates, but the media panel. In order to give the candidates ample time to answer questions from the media and from the audience, we ask that you hold all applause until the end of the evening. This will allow you, the voters, to hear the candidates and to make educated decisions when voting on September 9th. We also ask that you be respectful of any differences of opinion expressed by these candidates. Your silence allows all listeners the opportunity to hear the questions and the responses. Also at this time, please silence any of your cell phones, and just as a little extra, if you do need to go out quietly, restrooms are down the hall on the left, down the hall to the right and then on the left. Our candidates to my right are Ian Ryan, Alex Morash, and Elisa I'm sorry, Elisa. I did it well the first time. Elisa Zawadzkis. Right. Thank you. They have allowed me, by the way, this evening to refer to them by their first name, and I appreciate that. All candidates have the opportunity to answer every question. Each candidate will be given up to 5 minutes for opening statements, 3 minutes for closing statements, 2 minutes to respond to questions, and if our media panel has a quick follow-up question, they're limited to respond in 1 minute or up to 1 minute. However, any candidate has the option to utilize his or her time to respond to something that might have been said prior or to clarify something. But in doing so, they are still utilizing the time that is allotted to them, nothing extra. At a designated time, and we're saying maybe around 8 or 8:10, we will then open up questions to the audience, live audience here tonight, or by email at Cape Media website, Facebook, or Twitter. And I will tell you, we already have some questions that have come in. All of this information, for those of you who are watching from home, is listed at the bottom of the screen. For those of you at home, if you need to write this down, you can contact us then. All audience questions will be given to me, the moderator, by our League volunteers. Because we won't necessarily have the time to have all questions asked, You in the audience, the live audience, have the opportunity after the evening is over to direct that question to the candidates, because they will be staying around to speak with you after. Those of you from home can do that via their websites. They have the opportunity, you have the opportunity to ask them questions through their websites. Our league volunteers sitting in the front row, would you raise your hands for the audience, please? Thank you. They are our timers, and they will be giving us a 30-second, 15-second, and stop notice. If you see the 30 seconds, please don't stop. You can still talk, okay? If you are in the middle of a sentence at the end of the stop, I will allow you to finish that sentence. However, I will then very graciously tell you your time is up if you do continue to speak. That allows everybody then to have a fair chance. Prior to the broadcast, the candidates met with me in another room to pick numbers as to the sequence in which they would speak in their opening and closing remarks. Ian will speak first, Elisa, and then Alex. We are also pleased to have members of the media participating, as Karen mentioned earlier. Cape Cod Media Center is telecasting this program, and additionally, the following media panelists will ask questions. Ryan Barber from the Cape Cod Times, Matt Pitta from WXTK Radio, and Caitlin Russell from the Register. And again, similarly to our candidates, they pick numbers, and Caitlin will ask the first question, Matt the second, and then Ryan the third. And we're hoping to allow the media to ask 3 or 4 questions this evening for each of the candidates. So let's begin. We'll start first with Ian.
Thank you very much. Tonight, thank you for watching. If you're home, I'd like to take a moment to thank the League of Women Voters for moderating our panel and keeping us honest about our time, members of the media panel, and Cape Cod Media Center for hosting us. I'd also like to thank Cleon Turner for being the impetus behind this panel and for making it possible by retiring. I am genuinely sorry to see him go. I admire Cleon very deeply. I admire his work ethic. I admire his work product. I admire the way he's turned, as the first Democrat to hold the seat since the Civil War, what had been a backwater, backbench seat into an opinion leader in the legislature. He's been able to build coalitions within and beyond the legislature that help keep the interests of the 1st Barnstable District met by our legislature. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to speak to you tonight and for the 3 of us to talk to you about how we will answer that legacy, what we intend to build on that very strong foundation. I'm from Dennisport, which is not very far from the studio, less than a mile, I think. I'm married, happily so. We have 3 children between us, the youngest of which is 20 and just moved into his first apartment, and I am as excited as he is, believe me. We have a family business, the Corsair and Crossrip Beachfront Resort right here in Dennisport again. So I'm coming to you from the business community. I know how to keep a budget. I know how to manage employees. I know how to be involved in a community, because all business derives from our community. I've been fortunate to work as a director of the Dennis Chamber of Commerce. We also have a real estate agency that focuses on seasonal vacation rentals. So as an employer, I also deal every day with wage issues and the seasonality of work on Cape Cod. And when I'm not busy, I'm also a lawyer. I have a deliberately small practice devoted almost exclusively to mediating high conflict family law matters. I choose mediation. I was a mediator before I became a lawyer, and my mediation approach has always been to avoid arguing a position at all costs, but look for the underlying interest that's often shared between parties who believe they're in conflict. Show it to them and then remind them that they're empowered to solve their own problem. That's my driving approach sort of in life, and I think it will be my driving approach also in the legislature. Those are what I'd call my professional qualifications, but it's really my personal story that drives me to ask you to vote for me on September 9th. I came back to the Cape in 1999 after a 10-year period away, 6 of which I spent on active duty in the United States Army. I was a Korean linguist and gave sort of tactical intelligence support to U.S. ground forces, including 2 hardship tours in Korea. But it wasn't until I got back, I got out of the Army, that I realized how easy it was to sort of get locked out of our economy. As a veteran, indestructible man in his 20s with lots of leadership skills as a non-commissioned officer, I believed I would get out of the Army and pick up my education where I left off. I left college after my first year because we couldn't afford to send me back for the second. But I thought I'd pick up my education, pick up a job. It would be easy, but it turned out I didn't have anything like the means to finish my education. I didn't have anything like the job skills I needed to get into a civilian economy. It turns out that spying on your North Korean neighbors is not something people like to pay you to do outside of the Army. So I had 6 months of savings, and on the 8th month, there was no food in the fridge. I couldn't feed myself, I couldn't feed my family, and you, the community, helped me do the hardest thing I've ever done for my family, which is apply for food stamps. You kept me from being hungry, you kept my children from being hungry, for as long as it took for me to get on my feet. And once I was on my feet, you helped me with veteran services programs, get back into the workforce. You helped me with things like the GI Bill, helped complete my education. You helped me with things like guaranteed Stafford loans with reduced interest rates so that I could afford to go to law school, something that working class people are able less and less to do. I managed to do those things, turn myself into someone who was reaching out for help and into someone who can help someone else. I went from being unemployable to an employer. And my focus, as we talk about the 3 things that are important for the district, wastewater management, school funding, and transportation, is to always do it in a context of keeping that door to success open. My job will be to prop it open for the people who come after me so that my story can be repeated in this generation and the next and the next and the next after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we'll have Elisa.
Okay. Thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for hosting us here tonight, and to the media for your participation in this event, and for you all being here and showing an interest in our race. And thank you to Representative Cleon Turner for your devoted service to this community for so many years. You certainly have left some big shoes to fill, but I'm up for the challenge. And I, like all of you, love Cape Cod. This is where I'm from. I've lived here since I was 5. I grew up in Orleans, and I went to Nauset from kindergarten up until 10th grade. And that's where my mother was a teacher for 25 years. She taught culinary arts. And my father opened his law firm when they moved the family here when I was 5. I have 2 older siblings. So I grew up here, and I had a wonderful childhood, and I'm so happy they moved us here. After Nauset, I went to Deerfield Academy for 2 years. And from there, I attended the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. I played Division I basketball. I was the captain my senior year. And I had a wonderful experience at Holy Cross. Sports has always been an important part of my life. As a junior player, I considered pursuing a professional career, but I peaked when I was 13, and then I shifted gears to basketball. But sports has taught me so many valuable lessons that I carry with me today: teamwork, leadership, work ethic, commitment. And those skills and lessons I've felt them more than ever, especially on the campaign trail. Being a gracious winner and a gracious loser, and managing time, that might be the most important one. Because at Holy Cross, they valued student athletes, and there wasn't much slack for when you're on the road. But my experience at Holy Cross was very eye-opening for me. I was a sociology major, and that was the first time that I really saw the injustice in the world and in the state. And the mantra for Holy Cross is men and women for others, and that really rang true to me. My coach was a great example for me. He was devoted to his community, devoted to his faith, devoted to his family, and he brought all those worlds together and we did so much community outreach, and he instilled these important family values and values of the community involvement. And I have reached out with him a lot recently because that's what I want and intend to do in this community. And Holy Cross, when I graduated, I realized that I wanted to find a way that I could help other people who don't have a voice or have limited resources to really advocate for themselves. I decided to go to law school. I attended New England School of Law to do that. That's in Boston, and I always give my dad shout out with his joke that it's the Harvard of Chinatown. But I attended New England School of Law, and I decided after I graduated that I wanted to use my education and my law degree to practice law on the Cape and help the residents of the Cape. I think, and that's what I do. I've been back for almost 8 years practicing law. I own the business together with my father, and we're also partners, advocating for people in this community every day. I am a homeowner in West Dennis for the past 7 years. I've seen firsthand the necessity of balancing the growth and development, but also with the charm, preserving the charm and the character of this community. I decided to join the Zoning Board of Appeals, and where that you really learn about striking the balance between those two things. I've had the honor of serving the Dennis community on the zoning board for over 5 years. And I've also, in my practice, I've realized the most meaningful part of my practice has been advocating for women and women who are without resources. And I say that because I've been involved in an organization called We Can, which has been instrumental in, it's an organization that I consider that I'd want to support. And finally, the seniors. Cape Cod wouldn't be as wonderful as it is if it weren't for the seniors. I intend to advocate and make sure they live with the dignity and respect that they deserve. I'm a hard worker, I always have been, I know no other way, and I'll work hard for you, your family, and this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you for hosting, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and Representative Turner for putting this on tonight. I know without Representative Turner's work to get us all to here tonight, we might not have had these debates, so I applaud you, Representative. I also want to thank those in the audience and the viewers at home. Thank you for watching tonight. My name is Alex Morash, and I'm asking for your vote September 9th. I was raised in Yarmouth, was educated in the DY school system, after which I went on to receive my bachelor's from Framingham State and my master's from Northeastern University. I have a long history of working on progressive issues and causes in Massachusetts, from serving on the Democratic State Committee representing Cape Cod, being vice chair of the Young Democrats of Massachusetts, and being an advocate at the State House for youth suicide prevention as a member of the Massachusetts Commission on LGBT Youth. Last debate, I spoke about the need to address our schools' funding issues, how Massachusetts underfunds our special needs programs by $1 billion a year, how we need to have truly free education for our veterans at our public colleges and universities. We need to expand the senior citizen real estate tax credit, and it's time to close Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant. These are important issues, and I hope we continue that discussion. Since the last debate, we have made progress. The state has finally passed a bill to enact a new funding formula commission for our school funding, which I advocated for last June. Now, as your next state representative, I will promise that the work on our education is not done yet. I will fight for our schools to make sure that the education formula includes specific provisions to properly assess for special needs education. This debate tonight is about the future. What do we want Cape Cod to be like for our children and our grandchildren? Do we want a Cape Cod where it's accessible for seniors? Will young people move here and raise a family? Will the Cape Cod of tomorrow be a place where we have walkable communities supported by public transportation? Or will we see Cape Cod of less accessibility, more traffic, and the privatization of our bridges and roads? I stand with Cape Cod to make it a livable place and for our children, to raise our families, and to retire. I am for moving the commuter rail to Cape Cod, investing in our schools and education, and supporting our seniors. This debate is about the future. The choices are clear. Please vote for me this September 9th for our schools, for our seniors, and to keep Cape Cod on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll open it up to questions. First question from Caitlin Russell of the Register.
Hi everyone. My question for you guys. What kind of approach do you favor for dealing with wastewater that is polluting coastal towns? A town-by-town approach, a super local approach, or a more regional approach?
And we're going to start the answer with Ian.
Wastewater management is a really serious problem. I'm glad it's coming up first. It's sort of the giant, filthy elephant in the corner. We need to start addressing it according, I think, to the 208 plan, which was recently published by the Cape Cod Commission, which has done an excellent job of turning itself into a planning agency. And it is a regional plan, but its implementation is actually watershed by watershed. So it's being driven by the actual physical environment rather than by political boundaries, which is going to be in the best interest of everyone involved. How we implement it in the 3 watersheds in the district, again, you can go block by block and see whether we're going to be using sewering systems or common septic systems or alternative systems like fertigation or composting toilets, or using our shellfishing industry to turn into sort of pivot and also be our environmental preservation industry. All of those things happen to happen in concert, and they all need to happen shortly. So I guess to answer your question more directly, we have a regional plan which we need to implement, and it's going to be horrifically expensive. The cost is estimated to be about $3.8 billion over 50 years. That will hook 46% of households up to common systems and use alternative systems like fertigation or shellfishing or dredging to keep our waters clear as alternatives and supplements to those programs. So we need to implement it watershed by watershed according to the regional plan. And we also need to get the rest of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to be investing in this giant and expensive program. We are really the golden goose of Massachusetts. We send billions and billions and billions of more dollars to Boston than we ever get back. And it's time to start making one-time investments in Cape Cod for the rest of the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Elisa.
Thank you. The wastewater issue is the single most threatening issue to not just the environment, but the economy on the Cape. And we have the courts breathing over our neck, and I'm very supportive of the Cape Cod Commission and the hard work that they're doing to implement some solutions to this problem. I know we read just recently that there's going to be hearings coming up in over the course of the next months, and having the community input to see what we're going to do about this, because as I said in the last debate, no one's going to want to retire here or come here on vacation if our water is not clean. So it's the single most important issue that we're facing today. And I admired Dan Wolf when I saw him speaking about it, that the reason he decided to run initially was to conquer this problem. And I thought that was really impressive, because he sees something that is such a challenge, and that appealed to him. So to answer your question, Caitlin, I think it needs to be both a local approach and a regional approach, because a one-size-fits-all does not work. Not only is each town different in the best approach, but each estuary within the town. But it does need it needs some creative solutions. It also, in order to, for the impact financially not to be so significant, it's necessary that we get funding from the state and the federal government and make them realize that it's not just an issue for the Cape Cod residents. If our economy, the tourism, is affected, it's going to affect the whole state, and they need to help us with this problem.
Thank you. Alex?
Regionalization is probably the most important thing for us when it comes to dealing with wastewater and most of our different issues. You know, I went to a regional school, and you can just get better access to funding for town by town when you have a regional approach. The Cape Cod Commission and Barnstable County have been working very well on this issue of wastewater. If we want walkable communities and having more cluster developments, as the Commission has talked about, we need to be moving more towards community sewering or community septic tanks. I'm much more in favor of trying to get funding through the Wastewater Abatement Trust for larger infrastructure projects of sewering, and I think looking at it from a regional approach is the best. When you do a regional approach, a lot of people say, oh, you know, is it going to be one size fits all? No, anytime you do a regional approach, they're obviously going to look down at all the different issues for you, get the different estuaries set out, and work best that way. But when you pool your resources together and pool our towns together, we're able to advocate for more money at the State House. Thank you.
Thank you. Second question from Matt Pitta.
Thank you. This district is set right now to have one of the first medical marijuana dispensaries, and so a two-part question here. One, the whole process has really not been rolled out in a very smooth fashion. There have been some controversies regarding that. So your comments regarding that, the medical marijuana issue, and then secondly, it's likely that we're going to see a statewide ballot question on legalizing marijuana coming up within the next year or so. So if you could each address those two parts, please.
Sure, and we'll start with Elisa.
Sure. I've seen this firsthand as an attorney. I've been in the courts in Barnstable County for almost 8 years now, and a lot of the possession cases tend to be small amounts, so I think legalizing it did make sense, or making it, not legalizing it, making it a civil, and decriminalizing it. But now we're on to the issue of it becoming allowed for medical uses, which there's significant benefits to that, and I think I'm not in any rush to legalize it completely. I think it's a matter of time that is going to happen. We're in a good spot that we could learn from Washington and Colorado, who have done it, and maybe learn from pitfalls or how it's playing out there. One concern I have is with the law enforcement for the OUI operating under the influence of drugs, because right now those cases have to be dropped if that is the case, because they don't have drug recognition experts. So we don't want the legalization to be ahead of before we have an infrastructure ready to support the enforcement aspect. So that would be, I think, if we proceed cautiously on that, and with the understanding that it probably is going to be inevitable, considering that it was a ballot by the people to decriminalize it, and it's probably going to be the next step.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. You know, the State House has a choice. We can either allow the voters to do a very quickly done, one-size-fits-all medical legalization for marijuana across the board, or the State House could work on the issue. I do believe the role of lawmakers is to draft and make laws, which is one of the reasons I'm running for state rep. And if they don't work on that issue, if they don't take care of legalizing it through the legislative process, weeding out all the possible issues that could come from that, you know, making sure that how are you going to sell it? Are you going to allow people to grow it? Are you not going to allow people to grow it? A ballot initiative will just be a quick blanket sweep across and say, all right, it's legal, good luck everybody. And I think the legislature needs to do its job and address the people's concerns and find a way to legalize it safely.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ryan Barber. I'm sorry,
I
my
like
error.
marijuana too.
Yes, you do. I'm sorry. My error. Ian, my error. Your response. Sorry about that.
I agree with the comment so far. if you look at the way Massachusetts is heading in a citizens ballot initiative decriminalizing it, the people of Massachusetts are telling us that they're probably heading towards legalization, and they're certainly headed towards changing the law enforcement approach to things like marijuana. This is where a mediator's approach can help with this sort of thing, because the whole hot mess that is rolling out of this medical marijuana issue is really just an attempt to avoid having a difficult conversation. We were obviously headed with the ballot initiative towards legalization, but it was too much to bear to talk about legalization across the board, so we've sort of invented this thing. I don't believe for a minute that if the benefits of marijuana were medical, they wouldn't be part of the US pharmacopoeia and distributed through pharmacies. Instead, we have this separate system and towns taxing it, and no matter where you feel about the issue, if you don't think we should legalize marijuana, the last thing you want is your town reliant on taxes from the sale of marijuana. If you think marijuana should be legalized, the last thing you want someone to do is to be taxing medicines. So we've driven ourselves into the situation where everyone's unhappy with the solution. I think if we're headed towards legalization, we need to just grow up about drugs in general. We need to stop treating them like a criminal justice problem and start treating them like the public health crisis that they are. And I'm talking here in particular about the opiate addiction and the associated crimes that are ripping through our communities, stealing a whole generation from us. All of that springs from legal gateway drugs like alcohol and tobacco right into legal drugs, prescription drugs that then lead to heroin and street pills. That's where we need to address our problem and start looking at diversion programs, drug courts, treating it like a public health problem and not like a criminal justice problem. And then we'll be in a much safer place as a community to start looking at legalization.
Thank you very much. Now, Ryan Barber, your next question.
At the last forum of these, each of you were asked what bill you would file first if elected. If memory serves, Alex, you said that you would want to have a commission to take another look at the Chapter 70 state funding formula for schools. Ian, I believe you discussed improving access to public accommodations for transgendered citizens of the state. And Elisa, I believe at that point you had said that it wasn't something that you had considered much. I was wondering if the three of you could update us on your thinking on what the first bill would be that you would file.
And we're going to start with Alex.
Well, I'm very fortunate where the state has finally passed what I've been calling on them to do. So even though it's a good first step, the next step, and I'd probably have to do it through filing a bill, is requiring that the way we do special needs funding at our schools is on a per pupil basis. So this, for those of you at home who are not familiar with Chapter 70 funding for our schools, Chapter 70 is the law that handles how we fund our schools, and everything is done on a per pupil basis except for special needs funding. In fact, the way the law is designed, it's designed to discourage schools from identifying special needs students, which is a terrible thing to do to our children. I would require the state, when it's doing its funding allocations, to do all special needs as per pupil instead of as a percentage of the population. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Ian.
I would reiterate that we need to fix the situation with the law relating to public accommodations for transgender people. The reason I think we have a little more time to be expansive about it is because that particular protection was cut out of a civil rights protection law that was passed. In other words, we have endorsed the idea in Massachusetts that it is okay among all people to discriminate in public accommodations like hotels, motels, hospitals, doctors' offices, restaurants, against transgendered people, alone among all of our fellow citizens. It offends the dignity of people who are, for all intents and purposes, just like me on the inside, and I don't know why it should stand. I don't know why that happened in a legislature that is overwhelmingly Democratic, with a Democratic governor. There is no excuse for it. This is a party that needs to get right with its values. There is still time for the civil rights generation to make good on its promise. Not a whole lot of shopping days left till Christmas here, but we can get there. And by leaving someone out and endorsing the idea in Massachusetts that it's all right to discriminate against a group of people because there are a few of them, or because they're unpopular means that we have endorsed the idea in Massachusetts that the law may be used to humiliate our fellows. And that's not all right with me, so it remains my first priority.
Thank you. And Elisa?
I'm not coming into this position with any personal agenda. My role, as I see it, is to be a vessel for the constituents of this district. So what they want is what I would advocate for. And what I will say is, for my 6 months of campaigning, I've had the pleasure of meeting so many people, and I've developed my priorities based on the discussions I've had with those people. And a few of the issues that have risen to the top are educational funding and also keeping young people on the Cape. That's been, I've been intimately involved with that as a member of Cape Cod Young Professionals, and it's exciting for me to see that there is an initiative called Shape the Cape Initiative, where they've recently got funding from the state, $50,000, to start a pilot program for mentoring. So it's speculative at this point because we still have another 6 months to go, but I could foresee assisting them in what they need to push that initiative forward, because it's encouraging that we're already getting attention statewide for how crucial the issue is. For those of you that aren't sure what I'm talking about, is from the period of 2010 or 2000 to 2010, 27% of the population ages 25 to 44 left the Cape. And the most concerning and they did a study to see what we're going to do about that and what changes we're going to make, and I want to be part of the change because it's something I could see that. But again, I'm open-minded, I'm still listening, I'm still learning, and I'm going to keep an open mind throughout this whole process. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question from Caitlin.
There have been a number of deadly overdoses, heroin overdoses in Dennis, specifically from July 16th to August 1st, 3 fatal ones in a town of less than 15,000 people. I was just wondering if any of you had any ideas as to how to help people who are already addicted and to stem the flow of heroin into the Mid-Cape communities.
Thank you, and we'll start with Ian.
This sort of is related to my prior remarks about legalization, how we need to grow up about drugs. They're real, and the principal entry point for people who are overdosing on heroin is prescription drugs that are entirely legal. By changing the prescription parameters for drugs like OxyContin and oxycodone, we've sort of driven people into the street version of it, which is essentially heroin. And I've seen the change in our community happen right on my street. You know, it started with things being lifted from cars. It started with break-ins. It started with 12 televisions getting stolen. There are people who are being driven by addiction, and we need to acknowledge, first of all, that addiction is a disease. It's not a moral failure. We need to stop talking about addiction as if it's a criminal act, and start addressing the fundamental problem, which is a public health issue. Right now we're using a law enforcement approach to a public health problem. So we build prisons, we arrest people, we make minimum sentencing guidelines, we throw them into jail, they learn who to call first when they get out to get back on their drugs, and we never address the problem. So we're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars treating the symptom and not the problem. We need to take some of that money, instead of spending $1 billion on prisons in the next 10 years in Massachusetts, start spending it on drug courts and diversion programs, start making healthcare payments to drug and alcohol counselors part of our comprehensive healthcare package here in Massachusetts, and really just pull up our pants and address the problem properly. We have the criminal justice problem is trafficking, and we have the tools to deal with that. We need to stop applying those tools to addiction and start treating it like a medical problem.
Thank you. Elisa.
Thank you. The drug epidemic, the opiates and the heroin, is very concerning to me. I've seen it firsthand as a lawyer in the courts almost daily, and I see what resources are available to get help, but what I really see is what resources are not available. There's not enough options for treatment. And I've spoken to Judge Merrick about this, who recently retired as the presiding justice in Orleans District Court. And one thing that he pointed out, and I didn't notice until he did, is that when there's a Section 35, and what that is if you could petition the court to, if you're concerned for the safety or well-being of a family member because you're afraid what they'll do to themselves or because of an addiction that they're struggling with, if you go to court to petition the court and ask them to be committed to get treatment, there's only one doctor in this region to do those evaluations. And so there'll be times where the family is desperate and comes to court and there's no resources available, there's no doctor to do that evaluation. That's one simple example of what needs to change. Then what happens after the judge decides, yes, I agree with you, this person, generally a child, or a child, teenager, 20s, they need help and they agree that they're not safe to themselves. There's not a bed available. So what happens is they go to jail. This is not someone who has committed a crime. This is someone who is suffering from a drug addiction. So the short or a long-winded answer, I guess, to the question is there needs to be more resources available to get treatment, and I will advocate for that, for funding.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. Whenever we're talking about substance use, or really when we're really talking about substance abuse, we need to start looking at it more and more as a public health issue and a mental health issue. When we're dealing with people who decide to take harsh drugs in large amounts, what leads them to that? And it tends to be mental health issues. It's a terribly sad tragedy that Robin Williams took his own life recently. And one of the things was he was suffering from depression, and it looks like he was suffering from dealing with alcohol, many believe, as a way of self-medicating for that depression. And when dealing with mental health, it's twofold. We need to have more mental health parity in our hospitals and our healthcare system. Congressman Patrick Kennedy did a great job at the federal level moving it forward on this. But we still have a ways to go. But there's also the aspect of making it more socially acceptable to be able to use mental health services. It's a tragedy, the judgment that still goes on in our society with mental health. And that's just one part of that issue. Mr. Ryan brings up a good point talking about pharmacies and big pharma pushing drugs on people. My significant other is finishing his pharmacy degree, and it's CVS. He is required as a pharmacy person to call people who have stopped using their medications and try to convince them to go back on so CVS can make more money. It's terrible. I don't even know how such a thing can be legal. But that's the sort of thing going on in our healthcare system. So those are the big issues. At the end of the day, it comes down to regulating pharmacies and also looking at making our mental health facilities better. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Matt.
We've spoken about some very general issues that affect much of the Commonwealth. Could you be very specific about an issue that you believe is important to this district specifically, to perhaps one of the 4 towns, either Yarmouth, Dennis, Brewster, or the portion of Barnstable that you represent? So could each of you be very specific about the district, an issue in the district that is unique to that district?
We're going to start with Elisa.
An issue that's unique to the district, the one that comes to mind is educational funding, and that might sound like it's a statewide issue, but our district is unique because we are a tourist community, and the people that have the summer, I'm not explaining this very well, but the only allies we have are the Berkshires, with the fact that, so we have the Chapter 70 funding, and it's the first Barnstable district, and the Cape is in a tough position because the rest of the state thinks we're rich, and we don't get as much funding as they think we could fend for ourselves. So it's a unique issue to our community that is difficult to change on a statewide basis, and that one stands alone in my head. And the formula right now uses the property value to determine how much funding is appropriate to give to our school district, and not the income. In fact, the members in our community, the median income is less than the state as a whole, and it always has been. But no one believes that. So we are forced to work within what we have, and we need to be creative. And I think Representative Turner did a great job of thinking outside the box with the whole regional school caucus, and that was one way to get funding that is outside of the Chapter 70 formula, because we are in a unique position in our district compared to the state as a whole to make any changes to that formula, but it does need to be reevaluated. I heard Speaker Teresa Murray talking about that the other day, to reevaluate that formula.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. One thing that I see as important for our district to bring, that I would fight to bring to our district, is the expansion of the commuter rail to Buzzards Bay and hopefully also to the Hyannis Transportation Center, possibly with a commuter parking lot in off of exit 7. I think this would be very important, one, to attract economic development to our district, while also giving our 10,000 commuters from the Cape the option of commuting to either Boston or anywhere down the Kingston line where they might be working. You know, dealing with issues like this, it's so important when we're trying to attract young people to move to our district that they have options to get to work, whether it be through busing or their own car or taking the commuter rail. We need to have these options for people. And it's actually much more affordable than some people have advertised. I know Mr. Ryan referred to this project as costing billions of dollars and another $1 billion to move it from Buzzards Bay to here. And I said, you know, that's interesting. I thought that was very interesting because I know that Mr. Barber reported at the end of May in the Cape Cod Times that the Executive Office of Transportation said the Buzzards Bay expansion would cost $50 to $100 million. And there would be similar projections when expanding, trying to get to the transportation center hub here. Now, where, of course, would multiple billions of dollars come from? I said to myself, you know, what's the only project I can think of the commuter rail doing that's over $1 billion? It's the South Coast State Rail, which is going to New Bedford and Fall River. Mr. Ryan, you can't even get on the right train if you're not going to be able to get that right. How can we trust you to navigate the State House if you can't navigate South Station? Thank you.
Ian.
I will thank Mr. Moran for his remarks and let them speak for themselves. I think the most important issue that it's really hard to separate the district from the rest of the Cape. We're encountering that many of the issues we're looking to solve are related to the region, are related to the Commonwealth as a whole. If I had to pick one in particular, it would probably be the school funding formula as well. By choosing to make our local contributions be 50% based on property values and 50% based on income, we've decided very arbitrarily to do that. And it puts us at a significant disadvantage because our property values are driven really high by factors outside of our local economy. And we don't get to pay our taxes with our property, we pay it with our income. So that said, I don't want to piggyback on anyone else's answer. The recent change to our zoning laws throughout Massachusetts, the sort of modernization of our zoning plan, is going to do a lot towards helping us get to things like villages again, walkable villages with transportation, with common septic even being possible, with common sewering being available. So that change to our zoning laws is going to help us in not just transportation, but also in wastewater management, also in attracting families and fixing our school problem. So zoning is probably like the least sexy thing we can talk about after composting toilets, but it does a lot to bring all of those three major things, to bring all those three major problems that we're facing together. So I would say zoning.
Our next question
Just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
Alex, just for clarification, so do you favor bringing the commuter rail directly into Yarmouth at exit 7?
Yes, there's a possibility of the way the rail bends from the transportation center down past exit 7. It then starts to finally start going from south to east back to Boston. And there's a possibility of using some different lots in that area. Willow Street is mostly commercial property. There's no major areas of community raising that would be brought down. It would be looking at, is there a viable site for that? I know the 2002 Cape Cod Regional Transport Study has been looked at trying to bring the rail to Cape Cod, and the big thing is trying to get it to come more frequently to the Hyannis Transportation Center.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ryan.
Well, I'm actually glad it's my turn to ask the question because I have a piggyback follow-up from that here for Alex. Alex, there is in fact rail to the Hyannis hub from Buzzards Bay. However, the big issue with the cost is existing infrastructure. That exists from that infrastructure for the speed necessary for a commuter rail exists from Lakeville, Middleborough to Buzzards Bay. However, it does not from Buzzards Bay to Hyannis. That upgrade is seen as terribly expensive, millions upon millions of dollars, much more expensive than any 50 to 100 to extend it to Buzzards Bay. Just to follow up, are you aware of that cost and aware of that existing infrastructure? And are you saying that the state should in fact upgrade that infrastructure from Buzzards Bay to Hyannis?
And I'm going to interject here that I'm going to have all three respond to that, and it just happens that Alex is the first one to respond.
And this, by the way, is something that some members of the delegation have said they would not necessarily think is a good idea, all the way to Hyannis, that is.
Alex.
Thank you. There's two options for that. Yes, we need to upgrade from bolted track to welded track to allow the commuter rail to come here at more frequency. I do support the additional funding necessary for that, but you should always look for a plan B just in case. And one wonderful idea from John Kennedy, who owns the Cape Rail, is actually using more existing track right now as a piggyback from the transportation center here down to Buzzards Bay. I favor more the commuter rail coming all the way up, but if, let's say, the MBTA was not going to go all the way, if I fought for that money, we weren't able to get it for us, I would then really push hard to get us the Cape Cod Central Rail idea that Mr. Kennedy had proposed. Thank you.
Ian.
I like trains, just to be clear. I think bringing a visitor's train down that people will be delighted to spend 3 hours in is significantly different than creating a 6-hour round trip for a commuter and calling it a commuter line. I know we're supposed to like trains more than cars. I get it. But just because you're running the progressive checklist doesn't mean it makes sense. Suppose we spend however many hundreds of millions of dollars it takes to go from bolted to welded track. That's so that we can run trains at 60 miles an hour through Barnstable Village, through the backyards. If you've taken the dinner train, you can reach out and pluck people's laundry off their line. Do we really want to build a program? Is it even feasible given the community reaction to something like that? It's not wise. We've built our communities right up to these tracks because of the way they're used. And changing it so that we could have, the difference between a 2-hour 48 trip and a 1-hour 43, it's still a 6-hour commute for an 8-hour day. It's really not worth the money. It makes sense to drive to Buzzards Bay and take the train if you like trains. It makes sense to use the lines we have for trains to run at 30 miles an hour max to bring visitors down to us to stay overnight. It might be in 100 years that metropolitan Boston is so giant that we are a day trip community. But right now, building the infrastructure that would bring people in for the day and have them leave would actually blow the tax base out of most of our towns. Because overnighters pay room tax, not just sales tax. Room tax is a statutory share to towns. It doesn't go to the state and then get divided and trickle back down as local aid. It's actually a statutory share. And every dollar that we raise from overnighters in lodging tax is a tax that they don't have to raise through residential property taxes. So not only is it spending untold hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, at that point, why count if it doesn't make sense to build a 6-hour commuter rail that would risk our tax base?
Thank you. Elisa.
Thank you. We need to take this one step at a time. I was delighted when the Cape Flyer initiative started, at first as a pilot program last summer, and now they've made it a full-time thing, and it'll continue to grow. And anything to make the Cape more accessible, both to go to Boston or to come here, is certainly worth considering, and a great idea, and I would be supportive of that, especially when we're talking about keeping the young people on the Cape, and I see that transportation is a big component of that. Now, whether or not it makes sense to expand it, to what extent, and the cost of it, I would need more information to make any determination about that. And I think the fact that we're going in the right direction with increasing it, that there's no need to rush into anything, especially when the cost is going to be so significant.
Thank you. We're going to do one more round around for each of the...
Doesn't get to be treated as my follow-up question?
I'm sorry. We're going to do one more round with each of our media representatives asking another question. This time we will begin with Caitlin.
All of you have mentioned the importance of trying to keep young people on Cape, and Mr. Ryan touched on this a little bit. A lot of these young people are veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and a lot of them are coming back with issues, from physical issues to mental PTSD and other things. And I was just wondering if any of you have any ideas as far as how to help them obtain the proper medical care that they need, but more importantly, to help them get back into the civilian workforce.
Thank you, and we'll start with Ian.
Thank you for your question. I think it's really important that we continue to address this in Massachusetts. You may not know it, but Massachusetts has some of the best complementary veteran services of any of the states. When I say complementary, in other words, they complement the Veterans Administration's programs. There are veteran service officers in every single town, and we have veteran service officers who work in our employment agencies as well. In terms of medical care, PTSD, or just regular reintegration, we have really let our veterans down. We are very good at building the Army for the next war, and we're really bad at building the healthcare system for the last war. Things are a lot better now than they were in 1996 when I got out of the Army. And just to be perfectly clear, I went back and forth to Korea, Texas, California, Washington. I did not see active combat. But the reintegration services that I got were fair. They weren't excellent. They were a different person to talk to about how unqualified it was for civilian jobs at the time. We've done a much better job in Massachusetts about doing supplementary income for older people, for opening our public universities and colleges, making the application process easier, using things like military training towards credits. One of the reasons I was able to finish my education was that so much of my training, although it was unusual among military training to have so much sort of academic background, much of that was credited to me through programs that acknowledged the contributions that veterans make. So Massachusetts is doing a great job of complementing the system, making clinics available through the change in the Veterans Administration rules, where if you live more than a given distance, you can go to another doctor and be reimbursed by the VA. You don't have to go all the way to the VA hospital. Those are things that we need to support in Massachusetts through those complementary VA programs.
Thank you. Elisa.
Thank you. Massachusetts has the best veteran benefits available out of any state, but we need to continue to grow and improve. I would support any legislation that supports veterans and the support that they need. That being said, I think it goes hand in hand with the lack of treatment available for mental health and substance abuse, and there needs to be more available resources for people who are struggling, and it's usually not isolated as to mental health or to substance abuse. It's almost always a combination of both. And as far as how it ties in with the young people, absolutely, for veterans who are struggling with some sort of issues that you're alluding to, or just young people in general, engaging them in the community as civic engagement. That's one of the avenues that Cape Cod Young Professionals is exploring. Is the idea is to attract the young professionals or young people in general to come to the Cape, but also to keep them here. So how do we do that? One of the pilot programs that they're exploring is civic engagement boot camp, to inform them about town hall meetings and different boards. And the more roots that you could put in the ground here, the more, the theory is, the more likely that you will have some pride in your community and be part of it. And I think it's a great idea. So that answers your question.
Thank you. Our next question is going to be from Matt.
Actually, Alex had a question. I don't believe.
No, I have not yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, and I just crossed your name off, Alex. This is two for me. I apologize. Alex, thank you.
You know, when dealing with veteran services and returning soldiers, we do have to be concerned about traumatic brain injuries and health issues. Up to 20% of our troops suffer either post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injuries, and they need access both through the VA but complementary care. One other thing that I really am pushing for with the State House is having truly free public education at our colleges and universities in Massachusetts for our veterans, whether they were recently came back and are eligible for the GI Bill, or for those who are even not eligible for the GI Bill. Currently, they say, oh, you know, you don't have to pay any tuition, and that's wonderful, except tuition makes up less than 20% of the bill. You have what's called mandatory maintenance fees, which is another thousands upon thousands of dollars. One thing I would demand of our State House is to stop forcing veterans to pay for those sorts of things. I think they've done enough for our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question now will be from Matt.
So coming up in November, there are going to be two questions that we'll all be voting on, and they could actually come back to be issues in the legislature as well. The gas tax and then the casino referendum, which the legislature approved, which is now on the ballot for all of us in November. So if each of you could give me kind of a yes or no on those questions that we'll all be looking at in November.
Okay, let's do a yes or no on the gas tax. First, Elisa.
Honestly, I need to know more about both sides of that, and I haven't made a decision regarding the gas tax. And as far as casinos is concerned, I think that there's better alternatives as ways to generate revenue. And so a no, I mean, I don't know if we just want to yes and no.
That's fine.
So,
Alex.
Sure. When it comes to the ballot questions, I'll be voting no on the gas tax ballot initiative, yes for earned sick time, and yes to repeal the casinos bill. I think casinos are really not engines of economic development. It's more phantom economics when you really look at it. They're not convincing you to put money into investing to buy something that you get a good from it, or even really an entertainment value. It's more of just trying to trick you out of your money, and I don't think that's the way for economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian.
I think that we are suffering and suffering and suffering about how to pay for infrastructure, and by indexing our taxes to inflation, we can actually stop running out of money and then wondering where all the money is. So that's where I stand on that thing. And as to casinos, my concern about I mean, if I wasn't a big fan of them to begin with, but it looked like at the time we were going to end up with one whether we liked it or not. So I'm glad we have a law in place to cover it. I will be voting to repeal the casino law because I think they're a really bad idea. They're essentially money extractors for communities. They put low-wage jobs in and pull enormous amounts of money out of our communities. It's just a really bad choice for economic growth.
Thank you.
I just think we need a clarification for this, because you said no to casinos, so you're going to vote to repeal or not repeal?
I'm getting confused. I would not, so repeal it,
You will repeal?
yes. If
Thank
I'm understanding I feel like there's
Question.
double negatives here, I'm
The
getting
question
confused.
now is
Right.
to repeal the casino legislation.
Right.
Okay, our next question is from Ryan.
Here in Dennis, we began the year with a big decision. The Cape Cod Commission decided to reject Lowe's Home Improvements plans of putting up a big box store right here in town. What was your stance in that debate, and how did that position fit into your larger vision of what Cape Cod can and should be?
Alex.
Thank you for that question. I actually went to the Cape Cod Commission's meeting on that issue and spoke out against low-wage Lowe's. Lowe's is a low-wage employer. When I spoke to their spokesman if they support organized labor, they immediately told me they do not support organized labor and want nothing to do with that. I said, I'm not interested in trying to attract jobs that are going to be low-wage. They're not going to spur much economic development. And quite frankly, not only on that, but there was no place to put the cars that were going to come there. They were going to come from two different directions. They weren't going to do it properly. I spoke out against it. I believe in economic development that helps Cape Cod, good job growth, expanding the commuter rail here so people can take the train to good jobs and stay here and put their taxes here is important. Having good companies come to the Cape, pro-labor organized companies come to the Cape Cod is wonderful. I do like that we just got a Whole Foods. If Market Basket was under old management, I would love to see a Market Basket come up to Hyannis and things of that nature. But Lowe's was clearly not an appropriate store. It actually would have resulted in a net loss of jobs for the town of Dennis, and the few new jobs it replaced would be of lower wage.
Thank you. Ian.
I have a pretty comprehensive answer to this, because as a business owner who needs to get the kinds of products you can buy at Lowe's, or you could buy at any of the smaller places locally on the Cape, there is a big impetus to be in favor of it. However, I tend to agree with Alex in that this is just like a casino. It's designed to pull money out into a giant corporation elsewhere and put low-wage jobs in. I don't object to businesses making money. I couldn't imagine saying something like we'd only have to raise land that's merely commercial. That area of Dennis is made for that kind of thing. That's the reason that we have the largest exit on the Cape. That's the reason. I mean, it's neighborhood. Let me say this more carefully. I opposed Lowe's because it's just a bad economic choice for the Cape. I didn't agree with a lot of the arguments that people were making against it, like it would change the character of the town, like it would be a traffic problem, like all development is bad. Those are bad choices for the Cape. That neighborhood has 3 stone yards and a landfill, so Lowe's would bring up the neighborhood, except that it would depress wages and make it even harder to live here. So. It's a really long-winded answer to a straightforward question. My apologies. So my opposition to it was on an economic basis, but I don't agree that it would change the character of our town, or that it would overwhelm us with traffic, or that development is bad. Those are dead ends for the Cape. The whole line of argument is a dead end.
Thank you. Elisa.
Well, Ryan, I can't think of a more controversial question, and it was finally put to rest, but here we are again. So I appreciate the question. By sitting on the zoning board, I've seen so many times the balance that we need to strike between economic development and growth and builders coming in with these ideas and these new homes, but also having to preserve the charm of Cape Cod, which makes it so unique and wonderful and what we all appreciate and value. And not just what we appreciate and value, but why people vacation here and why people want to retire here. So it's not just oh, I don't want Lowe's. It's we have to take into consideration what makes sense in this community. And the question is whether or not Lowe's does. And people do feel very strongly one way or the other about that. And it's a constant struggle in this community with that balancing act. And I don't think it needs to be all or nothing. And it can be, we can have these conversations without hating each other. And So living in Dennis, right down the road, it would have been a nightmare with traffic in July. It's already an absolute nightmare in that particular section at Patriot Square. So for that reason alone, that's not the only, I think that I would not, I think that's something that could have been a reason not to support it, but also the fact that the Cape Cod Commission was the ones who had all the information, took it into consideration, discussed it, and came to a decision. Who am I respect that opinion. I think they made a decision. They called it the way they see it. So we're all in this community together. That was the decision made, and so I'm fine with it. And does that answer your question?
Thank you.
I feel like there's maybe a little bit of clarification needed. I mean, you said you're fine with the Cape Cod Commission's decision, but and I felt like you addressed how you saw this issue fitting into the larger vision of the Cape. But to kind of rewind to the months before the Cape Cod Commission vote, what was your stance, say, when the meeting started, the day before the meeting, where Cape Cod Commission said no?
Well, I think this is my attorney coming in. They had more information than I did. So what we don't have all the information. So but my opinion was I had my reservations with the projects for a number of reasons.
Thank you. Now we're going to, first of all, thank our media panel, and we're going to go directly to audience participation. The first question is about the bottle bill. For several years, the legislature has failed to pass legislation to update the bottle bill to include water bottles, etc. Now it will be on the ballot as a citizen petition. If elected in the primary, will you and your campaign be an advocate for the update? Will you be a strong, vocal advocate? And we're going to start with Alex. I'm sorry. We're going to start with Ian.
Yes, 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 and yes. We need to stop throwing all this plastic away and start using it properly. We've got minimal returns as it is for glass and carbonated plastics. So much so that redemption centers were actually going out of business a few years ago. There's no reason that the plastic in this is any more dangerous or any less recyclable than if it had a carbonated drink in it. I'm not concerned about the increase in price to consumers of 5 or 10 cents or 25 or whatever it turns out to be, because all of the products that are sold in this kind of bottle are impulse purchases anyway. They're not going to change anyone's staple budget. So yes, I will support the bottle bill. I think it should have passed years ago.
Thank you. Elisa?
Yes, I would support it.
Alex?
Yes, and I think we might all want to hide our plastic bottles when that question comes by.
Thank you. Next question. On the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, what is your opinion on the licensing of the nuclear power station? Do you think that the NRC should pull that license because the safety of an enormous population cannot be assured? And this time we will start with Elisa.
I don't think the agreement ever should have been continued or renewed. It's one of the oldest power plants in the country. It's had some compliance issues. It is concerning that we would be if there is a situation where something goes wrong, it would be on us. There is that fear and danger, and it does need to close as soon as reasonably possible. I think there's a clear distinction that needs to be made between the argument of whether or not nuclear power is the best resource or whether or not this particular plant should be open or not. And I've heard Senator Wolf speak about this so many times, and he comes at it from a few different perspectives and is, as you all know, I'm sure, adamant about it being closed. So I think that whether or not it's through how and when it gets closed, it does need to be closed, and it is a concern of mine.
Alex.
Thank you for the question. Senator Wolf has been a leader on this issue, and it made me think about this issue when I first started running. You know, Pilgrim, it really is very concerning. And then I sat down with Diane Turnco of the Cape Cod Downwinders, and she explained to me all the data affecting us about how Pilgrim is over 42 years old. It was only designed to last for 40 years. How it's been given a 20-year license, even though there have been issues of possible leakages found around the site, not quite sure where those leaks are coming from. And we still don't have a proper evacuation route planned for Cape Cod. So of course, let's close it as soon as possible. I've been a big advocate of that for a while now. But also, we do need to expand the emergency evacuation zone to include all of Barnstable County and the islands. Without that, we are going to be required to shelter in place. Shelter in place, I found out, only gives you about 2 hours of any protection, and then it just starts to just get back to what a traditional level of exposure would be. And we'd be required to shelter in place until eventually the state or the federal government decide they come and get us, which I think is absolutely terrible. We need to be allowed to evacuate from that zone, and that's why we need to expand the emergency planning zone to include all of Cape Cod. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian?
Your question was about licensing, and I don't think it should have been licensed. I don't think that having the people from Fukushima there talking about their reactor, which was built along the same plans around the same time, should have led anyone to the conclusion that it was a safe alternative. I don't also buy into the idea that because it's a federal licensing issue that we don't have anything to say about it in Massachusetts. Alex is absolutely right. I won't even call it an evacuation plan. It's a non-evacuation plan. It calls for closing the bridges so we don't get in the way of the people who are leaving the tiny 10-mile exclusion zone that they've drawn around Pilgrim. If you overlay the exclusion zone from Fukushima, it includes all of Barnstable County, and that we all need to be in the evacuation plan. The fact that I have at home in my medicine cabinet 2 little tiny iodine tablets at 35 cents a piece means that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts values my life and that of my family at 70 cents, and that's not okay. The governor has got to certify that that evacuation plan is sound, and it isn't. And as your legislature, I will absolutely insist that he move to the federal government that they decertify the plant because there is no effective evacuation plan for Barnstable County. We also need to make sure that they use, without exception, a closed water system for cooling and for emergencies, and that they're not opening up their pipes in any direction to Cape Cod Bay. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is on economy. What will you do to strengthen the smarter economy on Cape Cod to promote technology and open Cape to new businesses? And we'll start with Alex.
Thank you. I always look at economic development as a 3-footed stool. You need to have economic growth, you need to have protections for working families, labor rights, and you need to have assistance for the poor. And to make sure that working families that need assistance can get that. Those are the biggest issues facing an economic growth on Cape Cod, is we need to have access to higher quality jobs and allow people to organize for collective bargaining. Now, when it comes to specifics of what type of jobs we could propose, one job that obviously comes to mind of good quality jobs is expanding the commuter rail, creates all sorts of new additional jobs for the Cape. We can also expand our technology sector in bulking up Cape Cod Community College. A few times now it's been considered making it maybe a 4-year college. I'd like to look more into that, to have more different degrees coming out of Cape Cod, because the way companies base where they're going to base their operations on are based on 2 major areas. You're looking at, one, the talent pool around it. That's why Boston sees so many startups. They have Harvard, they have MIT, they have Northeastern, they have BU. But they also look at it as how quickly they can come to market. You know, taxes aren't always the biggest issue with firms. It's how fast they can set up their shop and get into business, and regulation's the key. So when it comes to the Cape, it'd be great to expand the 4 Cs to a 4-year university. It would be great to make sure that our towns have everything in place to allow for faster coming-ins of different types of companies, and lastly, having strong worker protections and strong wages.
Thank you. Ian?
Could you repeat the question for me? I'm
Sure.
a little off base here.
under economy, what will you do to strengthen the smarter economy of Cape Cod to promote technology and open the Cape to new businesses?
We have, in the United States, probably the poorest penetration for internet access of any industrialized nation. And we started 20 years ago thinking about this open Cape concept, this silicon sandbar, that never really materialized. And it's because it didn't take into account things like the proximity to research centers, universities. It didn't take into account things like development hurdles with our really close environment here. So really the way to use technology to help build jobs on the Cape is to start treating internet access like a public utility. We have many government services which can only be accessed through websites, and yet we have a whole population of people who can't afford to have access to the internet. So programs like you can see in cities and towns in the Midwest, in Seattle, where they have specific zones where there's a public access to, a public supported and public access to high-speed T1 or T3 access to internet. And within that zone, it becomes part of an economic plan for the region. If we were to support something like that and actually bring the proper cabling in concert with things like the Cape Cod Commission is doing now in setting aside 4, 5, 6 parcels that are already set in a regulatory in the regulatory scheme for that kind of development. If we include a public utilities approach to internet access, we could really blow up and very quickly.
Thank you. Elisa?
The exciting thing is that there's a lot of room for improvement, and we're all recognizing the importance of the option of working remotely and the value of high-speed internet, and that goes right along the lines of what I've already spoken about a few times with the Cape Cod Young Professionals initiative of trying to find ways and brainstorm ways to keep younger people on the Cape, and that's one of the avenues that's being explored. And how do we, first of all, attract business here that makes sense for our community, whether it's low interest loans or grants, but also what to do to make the businesses here better and more profitable. And some of the ideas that I think would work is Dennisport's a great example of a community that's really had a facelift and is striving, and that I think we could do in other communities in the district where there are resources available to have experts come and give us advice from economic development at the state agencies, and that we could tap into to say what simple things like what demographics should we be attracting, what should the storefront look like, what's the lighting, things like almost like a retail for dummies, and get some ideas to improve the economy in the businesses within what we already have. It's a matter of marshaling resources. There's so many creative people motivated to improve the community, to improve the economy, and high-speed internet and remotely working, that's a huge part of it. But business development and polishing the businesses that exist a little is another part.
Thank you. Our next question is about transportation. I know we hit on this earlier, but perhaps just a yes or no. Do you support a commuter rail for Cape Cod, number one? And do you support the construction of a third bridge over the Cape Cod Canal, number two? And we'll start with Ian.
Yes to Buzzards Bay, and yes on the third bridge.
Elisa.
I would need to know more information on both of those, and I think to make it's still speculative. What's the cost? What's the impact to the community? What exactly are we talking about? I mean, there's experts here that I'm sure it's something that's going to be discussed for a long time before any decisions are made. So that's the best I could give as far as for an answers for today's purposes.
Thank you. Alex.
Yes, obviously, to the commuter rail, and no to the third bridge. I think the most concerning thing for me with dealing with the third bridge is, one, where would we put the cars after they get off the bridge? I haven't seen any plan of updating our highways and then our other roads on the Cape. Not many people realize our roads are now have the same type of traffic we had for the peak summer in the 80s and 90s is now our off-season traffic. And then when it comes to the funding of it, I am very concerned about having a public-private partnership, which some people consider innovative. I just consider it more Wall Street profiteering. It's terrible what this sort of idea is. The Massachusetts Organization of Concerned Scientists and Engineers has said it might lead to less contracting inspectors to make sure it's a safe bridge. So I have too many concerns for that bridge. I say no.
Thank you. The next question is about education. It's actually two individuals asked these questions, so I'm going to combine them. With regards to charter schools and charter school funding, what is your position on the expansion of charter schools, number one? And number two, Cleon Turner valiantly tried to legislate equitable and fair funding related to charter school tuition and reimbursement. What is your position, number two? And we're going to start with Elisa on that.
Sturgis is one of the best schools in the state. I mean, we have some great charter schools in this community, and I don't think anyone can dispute that. The problem is funding, and it's all about the money. And there's a lot of unfunded mandates that the non-charter school public schools have to pay for. So it would be tough for me to support expanding it. We see every year, especially in Dennis Yarmouth, the battle with funding DY. And so I would be, again, I certainly would keep an open mind in here on both sides, but I'd be reluctant to expand charter schools.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. You know, there's always battles going on with our funding, and that's why at the last Yarmouth Town meeting, I was a strong advocate for restoring funding to Dennis Yarmouth Regional High School. My view on raising the cap is I'm currently against it in its current form. My worry with charter schools is I don't see a huge anything that they really add to our public school system. Most of these jobs that these schools have are not collectively bargained. We don't really have as much information on what's going on in the schools. There's been critiques of, are these schools trying to dissuade special needs students from attending to bolster their number rates? And also, the state just quite frankly isn't funding them properly. The Department of Secondary and Higher Education said they need $104 million this budget cycle to fund the reimbursements for our public schools for children that leave the district and go to a charter school. Well, State House only gave them $80 million. I just don't see how this is going to work without better funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian.
Well, we should start with the proposition that charter schools work, and they are also public schools. We tend to talk about them like they're different animals, but charter schools are publicly chartered schools. And so there is no difference between funding for one and funding for the other, except in the case that, like Dennis Yarmouth, we have a per student budget. We call it a tuition that goes over to the charter school, which is calculated based on the demographics of Dennis and Yarmouth, wherein 50 to 55% of the students are considered low income. They're eligible for free or reduced lunch. And the argument is that those students aren't going to charter school. They're funded at a higher rate because we know that children from low-income families take more intensive education resources, but that those students aren't the ones that are leaving, but they're leaving with the full measure of their tuition. I would oppose raising the cap on charter schools until they address that problem. Charter schools were founded to prove the proposition that any student in the charter school model would succeed. And they've developed a lottery for entry, which is on its face fair and anonymous, but there's actually a self-selection process that goes into getting into the lottery. You have to come from a family culture that understands the value of social risk and reward. You have to come from a family that's engaged in your education and looking for alternatives. And you have to, if you don't live in Barnstable, provide your own transportation. Those three things, being aware of social risk and reward, having an engaged family, and being from an economically sound family, are all predictors of academic success. So until we put every public school student into the lottery and let students who prefer the traditional model opt out, and until the charter schools, the public chartered schools, include transportation for every single student, we won't have a level playing field. Until they do that, I'll oppose raising a cap.
Thank you. The next question is about traffic. Would you support, and I'm going to ask you just to say yes or no, would you support state funding for an exit 6A for commercial traffic going directly into Hyannis? Alex?
I haven't seen a proposal for that yet, but I'm very open to it. That sounds like a very logical idea.
Ian?
Yes.
Elisa?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, under traffic, would you support state funding for an exit 6A for commercial traffic going directly into Hyannis?
I haven't thought about that. It sounds like it's worth my consideration.
Thank you. The next question, and I know a few of you have hit upon this earlier, about youth and young people. How do we keep young people on the Cape? How can we help young people in service positions on the Cape and in housing, et cetera? And we'll start with Ian.
Lisa mentioned the Cape Cod Young Professionals Report, which reported that the number of people actually age 44 and under is declining. The narrative that we've developed on the Cape about that is that they're being driven out by retired people, that they're using up resources, and that the young people are becoming frustrated by the cost of living here and moving out. But if you read the report more carefully, it actually shows that the number of retired people on the Cape is not growing. So it's not a competition for resources. It really comes down to the economic reality of living in a resort area. We have very high property taxes, which leads to very high rents. And we have, comparatively, that is compared to the rest of Massachusetts, low salaries. We need to fix that on the housing side by using existing housing stock and using deed restrictions on existing housing stock to keep the cost of a new home down for a young family. That will avoid the environmental and development problems of building new affordable housing all the time because it's so expensive to live here. And it will also use start reusing the stock that we've already got in an affordable way. And we need to, again, redouble our efforts to build a year-round economy and properly fund our schools, because the three things that young families need are schools they can count on, housing they can afford, and jobs that will pay their way. The good news, again, from that Cape Cod Young Professionals report is that if you can fix the affordability of housing through deed-restricted housing for young people, you'll also fix it for retirees. So we can stop that sort of false dichotomy between the two populations who live here. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisa?
So there's two issues. It's attracting young people to the Cape, but also keeping them here. One thing that I'm excited about is Bridgewater coming. That way we'll have kids here. Then we just have to keep them. So anything like that is a step in the right direction. More programs available for nurse practitioners or physician's assistants, things like that. There's not as much, there needs, or expand on what Four Seas is doing. I was speaking with Representative Turner actually about the possibility of partnering with UMass for aquaculture programs, things like that, to connect the community and to keep people have some connection to the community. One of the pilot programs with the Shape the Cape initiative is a mentor program. That's the program where they got the $50,000 grant to connect, because it's true, we can, it doesn't, the seniors and the young professional, the seniors have so much to offer, the retirees come from a whole variety of different professions that are intelligent, and invest in this community. They have so much to offer the younger generation. So partnering them up is a great step in the right direction. Then affordable housing, that's the other pilot program that is part of the Shape the Cape initiative, which those are really the things that need to be addressed: jobs and the ability to live here year round.
Thank you. Alex?
I think the first thing we do need to deal with when it comes to attracting young people to the Cape is finding a place to rent. You know, as my normal day-to-day job, I'm actually a realtor, and people come to me all the time like, oh, I'd like to find a place to rent. And I'm like, I'm very sorry, our rental stock is extraordinarily limited for year-round stock. About almost half the homes on the Cape are secondary or summer rental homes. There's not that much for them. I think the Barnstable County Commission found 1 or 2% of our housing stock is rentals. Well, young people can't afford to just buy a home right out of college. You know, I graduated with my master's in 2010, and with my student loan debt, I'm certainly in no way positioned to be a homeowner for the next few years, as is almost everyone from my generation. So finding a decent place to rent is priority number one, and whether that be by doing affordable housing. I know Senator Eldridge has always been a wonderful advocate of pushing more affordable housing bonds so that towns like Denison, Yarmouth have access to them, but also finding good quality jobs, and whether they be commuting off Cape on the commuter rail to do that, or finding jobs here. We need to be pushing different ways of economic growth. And the last thing with young people is they like walkable communities. You know, when I walk around and see young people around, I'm seeing a lot of young people coming to Main Street Hyannis. You know, they have the commuter rail and the bus there. And I've also seen a lot of young people in Provincetown, which has the ferry, and they're also a very walkable place. So investing in walkable communities is the final thing that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to do just a few more questions, and then we're going to do the wrap-ups, okay? And this is on education, and specifically ESL, or English as a Second Language. What can be done to improve ESL programs? And we'll begin with Elisa.
What can be done to improve ESL programs? I certainly support an initiative to increase. If there's a need for that, I would need to know more information. I don't know specifically about what exists and what, if there needs to be more.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Alex?
Thank you. English as a second language learners face a lot of different problems coming into our schools. Many of them have immigrated from different communities. Some of them are even dreamers, and they need access to good programs. I'm not a supporter of English immersion, just sort of drop you in and see what happens. I think we need more access to special classes for them, additional teachers, assistants, and giving them the tools they need to succeed. You know, I've always found it fascinating when I meet someone who they came to this country, learned and had to learn English completely and immerse themselves in that after the fact. I'm in awe of them being able to be either bilingual or being able to completely understand a second language. And we should support them, and they should be commended. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian?
The commission, a commission, is meeting to look at how we make our foundation budget for schools. Right now, there is what's called a kicker for English language learners. In other words, there's a basic amount that we allot for a particular high school student. We might put a kicker in if that person also comes from a low-income household, or a kicker for English language learners. And it just simply needs to be a matter of looking, finally, at how we set our foundation budgets. We haven't looked at it in earnest in 20 years, and that's not okay. It's something we need to review periodically, maybe every single budget session or every other budget session, so that we're hearing from educators what they need to do and put it into our foundation budget formula. That's true for every aspect of education, not just for English language learners, but in particular for English language learners, we need to make sure we are building a system that is responsive to our educators rather than building something that just ossifies over time. Our English language kicker right now was established in 1994. That's not enough time to address how many or how we deliver English language education in schools. We need to look at it more often and deliberately as we set our new foundation formulas up. We need to include periodic review of foundation formulas to include English language learning.
Thank you. I just want to let the public know and the candidates know that some of the other questions that were not referred to this evening were about special education, technical education, support for the arts, recycling, road repair, and health. At this point in time, we are going to have clothing statement remarks from our candidates, beginning with Alex Morash.
Thank you for moderating tonight, and thank you to all of you at home who watched tonight and the League of Women Voters for making this happen. The media, thank you for attending this with us, and the viewers in the audience tonight, thank you all so much for attending. Tonight, we talked about many important issues. We discussed public transportation. We discussed how we can have walkable communities on Cape Cod. We discussed the needs for our education formulas and how we need to do better at the state level to help all of our children. As your next state representative, I will fight to make sure that our special needs students are properly taken care of and the state gives us the money we need for all of our students across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'll fight to make sure that we have the ability for public transit and the commuter rail to come to Cape Cod, and I'll fight to make sure that we are able to protect our seniors by expanding the senior citizen real estate tax credit. Thank you all again for watching and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Alex. Elisa Zadwadskitsk. Sorry, Elisa.
Thank you for moderating into the League of Women Voters. This was a wonderful opportunity for us to tell you a little bit about our campaigns and ask for your support. And thank you to the media for the questions and for all of you at home. And thank you for the live audience. We appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're only at, 3 weeks, so a little over until the primary election. I really appreciate your consideration in that race. It's a very important race this year, especially for Democrats. And I will tell you, I will work hard for you. I will work hard for your family, and I will work hard for this community. And I'm dedicated to this. And some of the issues that we spoke about tonight that I've heard a lot. I've had the pleasure of meeting so many, especially seniors. Believe it or not, it's mostly the seniors that are on my voting list, and I know you're active voters, but it's been a delight really, because there's no one that I admired more in my life than my grandmother. And she was fearless, and she had so much conviction, but she was also kind and warm. And supporting seniors and meeting seniors, her memory lives on with me, and it's been a real perk for campaigning. So supporting seniors will be a priority of mine, and I will fight for you for what you need. And also with the young people, we talked a lot about this. I don't want to belabor it, but I'll be a good bridge for both. It doesn't need to be one or the other. We need young families here, and I will do what I can to change the direction it's going in that regard. I'll fight for educational funding, and I'll be a strong voice for you in Boston. And please spread the word about our campaign. It's a really important election. Get out to vote. Remember to vote September 9th. And thank you so much for your attention and for your consideration.
Thank you. Ian Ryan.
Thank you again for moderating. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this together, to the Cape Cod Media Center, to members of the panel, to the volunteers again. I'm not a professional politician. I don't have any particular catchphrases to polish off and throw at you. I don't know how to or when to do a telephone push poll to decide to go whether or how to go negative. I don't sort of float majestically above the district. Although I'm a lawyer, I'm definitely not of the professional class. I have my life has been informed by how often and hard I've fallen flat on my face. And as we begin as a region to recover from the worst recession in our history. We have some values decisions to make about how we structure our business community, our social community, and our human services community. And as I said in my opening remarks, I've gone from unemployable to employer. I work not just in the business community, but also in the nonprofit community. I work in the arts as much as I work in customer service for visitors. I have a broader and a deeper experience with the way our economy works. I have a profound personal mission to make sure that our society stays just and wide and open. And I, as a mediator, will never presume to argue a position at any cost, to take the cheap shot. For me, there are no real conflicts in our civil discourse that can't be solved by finding our common interest. If you use, for example, the Dennis Yarmouth, what I'm calling the Bass River School Wars, there's no one in that room that doesn't want the best for their children. And if you start having that conversation, you can stop consuming our entire civil discourse with how little we can do for schools, which is what we end up arguing about. If you have a difficult conversation about marijuana legalization, even if it's deeply uncomfortable, even if it challenges a lot of our values as a society, if you take it on fearlessly and look for our common interests, you don't end up with an unworkable, wink, wink, nudge, nudge dispensary system. I'm not afraid to have those conversations. I have the training to have those conversations. I have the personal convictions to make sure that we are taking care of each other economically, socially, and that the dignity of every single citizen is respected. Those are the values that I think we can take into the future. That's my answer to Cleon Turner's legacy. That's what I am ready to build on the foundation that he laid for us. And I'll end the way I finished, which is to thank him for his 10 years of really fine, extraordinary work and for everything that he's done for the district. If you would like to see that work continue, I hope you'll vote for me on September 9th. Don't vote alone. No one should. Bring a friend. Thank you.
Thank you. This candidates forum is coming to an end. It will be rebroadcast on Channel 99 and will also be available at On Demand. The League of Women Voters of Cape Cod would like to thank also Representative Cleon Turner, the Cape Cod Media Center, Cape Cod Times, WXTK Radio, The Register, and you, our voters. It is our right and our privilege to have the freedom to vote in local elections. Primary election is September 9th. And now we'd like to offer best wishes and a round of applause to our candidates.